Free Julian Assange. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining the show. So let's go ahead and talk about Julian Assange and the latest of what's happened and what this means, what the implications actually are. So last Wednesday, August 11th, the government was granted what's called a widened scope to seek appeal against the block on Assange's extradition. So back in January, a judge said, oh, no, I don't think you can extradite Assange because there's potentially some issues with his mental health and he might actually try to commit suicide. So we're really kind of worried about that. And so we're not going to allow you to extradite him at this time. So the U.S. government was planning on appealing the extradition. Of course, we were expecting that. And now what happened was they were granted the ability to appeal on a number of grounds. And one of those is to say, well, we don't really think that his mental health is actually a real problem. And the reason why they're claiming this is because when they went to court this last Wednesday, they presented evidence to the judge that Julian Assange had fathered a couple of children while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy. And so now the judge looks at it and says, well, you know, the judge back in January, the ruling back in January was maybe not exactly accurate because they didn't know that he had fathered these two kids. And so I guess he has less of a reason to want to kill himself because he has these two children. Forgetting the fact that Julian Assange has at least two other kids, maybe even three other children. We know that he has Daniel Assange. He also has a child that's apparently in France somewhere. Who knows how many kids he has because he kept these other two secret. So I don't know why these two kids in particular are, the reason why he wouldn't kill himself. They knew about the other children before. So I don't know why these two kids are extra special and they're the reason why potentially Assange would think twice about harming himself. But nonetheless, that's what the judge ruled. They said, well, okay, I guess you're able to seek an appeal based on this new information that Julian Assange fathered these two kids and perhaps he's not actually a risk at harming himself after all. So that is what's happened. Now, in October is when the U.S. is going to argue in front of the British court to extradite Assange. We are expecting, I believe that is scheduled for October 27th, I want to say. Yeah. And we don't know how long that case is going to last, but we'll see if the British are actually going to go ahead and extradite Julian Assange to the United States. So, of course, if you're not really totally familiar with the case against Julian Assange, U.S. prosecutors have indicted him on 17 espionage charges and a charge of computer misuse over his organization, WikiLeaks, publishing thousands of leaked military and diplomatic documents a decade ago. So they're saying, because historically, and the reason why this case is so important is because it has been fairly normal for the United States to prosecute government or military whistleblowers. So if a government official, NSA employee, like we saw with Edward Snowden, or anyone in the military or intelligence, like we've seen this with John Kiriakou, we've seen this with Chelsea Manning, so there's these government workers, federal employees. When they leak documents to the press, the federal employees end up charged with espionage. Right? They get charged under the Espionage Act. However, journalists have been protected from this. So in the past, journalists have been charged and jailed, but not under the Espionage Act. Instead, they're charged and jailed under contempt of court. So essentially, the judge says, "Reveal your source" to the journalist, and the journalist says, "No, I'm not going to reveal my source." And they say, "Well, you're contempt of court. The court orders you to reveal your source." And they say, "I'm not going to do it." And then they end up throwing them in jail for a period of time until they give their source up, or the court oftentimes just gives up on that. So journalists or publishers have never actually been charged under the Espionage Act. And Julian Assange being charged is the first time this has ever happened. Now, of course, they're not saying, well, it's because he published these government documents that were top secret and classified and he put lives at risk. That's not and that's not legal. That's not what they're going after him for. They can't really do that because the precedent has been set that journalists and publishers are not prosecuted under this. What they're going after Julian Assange for is they claim that he facilitated in some way the acquisition of these classified documents. And that is what they're saying he did wrong. So he wasn't acting as a publisher or a journalist. They're claiming he was acting instead as an accomplice in the securing acquisition of these documents. And that's illegal. So, however, many of us say that they don't have any evidence of this. They're making it up because they're just wanting to punish him. And that this will set a dangerous precedent, because then what they will do in the future, you can imagine this, any journalist like the Washington Post, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, New York Post, whoever it might be, myself, it could be anybody, when a whistleblower approaches us and says, I've got these documents, here's a thumb drive, then journalists are going to be afraid that the government might come after the journalist or the publisher and accusing them of somehow facilitating the acquisition of the documents. So this will have a chilling effect on any journalist or publisher. They're going to think twice about releasing classified documents because they've seen what's gone on with Julian Assange, that he's essentially been imprisoned for a decade, in one way or another. He hasn't had any freedom for a decade. So that is the implication of going after Julian Assange. Now, whether you think the guy, you probably don't like the guy. I hear this all the time. People say, well, Julian Assange, but he's a big jerk, and, look at what he's done, and he's a misogynist, or that really doesn't matter. His a character assassination on him is irrelevant. Julian Assange himself is irrelevant as a person. It's what Julian Assange represents, and he represents every publisher and every journalist in the world who wants to blow the whistle on the U.S. government or any other sort of imperialistic government around the world. And we already see other governments making this sort of thing illegal, right? Saudi Arabia makes this illegal. China makes this illegal. The United States going in that direction is extremely alarming. So it really, even if you're in the camp of saying, well, but Julian Assange put people's lives at risk, and he shouldn't have done that. And so, yes, he's to blame. And Julian Assange, like I said, he's a misogynist, or you might say he's a rapist. You might say all of these things about Julian Assange. But the implication of that is what it does for future freedom of the press, what it does for future, for the ability for the American people to put the government in check. We need to have the ability to see what our government is up to, because remember, they work for us. I know there seems to be this shift, I feel like, in the mentality of people where they're sort of thinking, yeah, but the government does what the government does, and we shouldn't question the government, and we should, if the government says that's top secret, then we need to respect that because they're the authorities. But really, there needs to be sort of a consciousness shift in that. We are the authorities as the American people. The people are the authorities over the government. The government works for the people, and we have a right to know when our government is misbehaving or committing crimes and atrocities. We have a right to know these things because we have to keep our government in line and to say, not under our name. You're not going to be committing these crimes under the banner of the U.S. flag. That is not going to happen. So that is why this is incredibly important. Another thing that I want to bring up before we kind of move on, I just wanted to give you an update on what's going on with Julian Assange. I've been really covering his case and following it. And, it's really interesting, especially right now, we've got what's going on in Afghanistan. And a lot of people are citing, a lot of these journalists are citing the cables that were leaked, that were published by WikiLeaks, by Julian Assange, that actually expose many of the atrocities that have gone on in Afghanistan. And yet those journalists remain totally silent when it comes to freeing Julian Assange. It just seems like everyone's, it's the establishment media that are in with the Democratic Party, and it's really been the Democratic Party that's gone after Assange the most. Although Trump had the opportunity to pardon him, and he didn't because obviously the consequences that he would have, he was worried about the consequences to him personally because there's just so many people against Assange on both sides of the aisle. One thing that the judge brought up that I want to kind of shed light on is the judge or the barrister or the magistrate, I forget what they're called in the UK, but they said that there was a real risk that the conditions would be oppressive in the United States. I think this is really interesting. So they said, there's a real question about the human rights conditions of the prison where Julian Assange would be housed. So I want to go over some of those conditions that they're talking about. So the facility is in Florence, Colorado. It's the administrative maximum facility, and it is the highest security prison in the United States. The conditions, some of the conditions are that the units in the prison do not allow for private communication with family, journalists, or even lawyers. The prison, known for its high-profile inmates, has small cells and restrictions on contact with the outside world, has an infamous international reputation, mainly because of its policy of holding its inmates in an almost permanent solitary confinement. They're treating Julian Assange like he's a murderer. Who gets this sort of treatment? We have people that actually commit heinous crimes against children who aren't subjected to permanent solitary confinement. They at least still get visitors. So think about that for a second. We're punishing a person who published the war crimes of the U.S. government, and he's now even being kept in very questionable conditions. And if extradited to the United States, will be kept in even more conditions that are questionable. And we don't even treat heinous, violent criminals this way. So Dr. Sharon Shalev, a criminologist at the London School of Economics, says, quote, prisoners spend most of the day inside a small cell with no view and no contact with other humans. Everything is done from inside the cell. Even during medical treatments, doctors stand at the gate of the cell. It's essentially a cleaner version of hell. That is appalling that we have these sorts of prisons in the United States. It's appalling that we would think about sending a publisher or a journalist to one of these facilities. What kind of a country are we? We go after Russia. We talk about how they treat Alexei Navalny. We talk about China and how they oppress journalists. We talk about Saudi Arabia chopping up journalists. At least they're not going quite that far with Julian Assange, even though Hillary Clinton did say just drone the embassy, right, holding Julian Assange. So I don't know how much different that is. But this is the country this is who we are. And the country is exposing itself as being exactly who Julian Assange, in publishing the documents to WikiLeaks, the country is showing themselves to be that exact kind of evil empire, the type that commits war crimes and then punishes journalists and keeps them in solitary confinement and threatens to drone them. That's who we are. So I'll keep you updated on the happenings with what's going on with Julian Assange. A very dire situation, and we need more attention paid to this case. Mainstream media completely ignores it. So we here in independent media will continue to sound the alarm. Free Julian Assange. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe, like, share this segment. Also, please follow me on Locals. I have a Locals community, and that is where I do some casual live streams a couple times a week. I also post a lot of various different articles and information that, stuff that you don't really see in the mainstream news. I do a lot of publishing of that stuff there. So be sure to follow me in my Locals community. That link is down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more of my content, especially the uncensored kind, sign up for my Locals community. Locals is where we can freely discuss topics that are often censored or limited by big tech. Not only will you get bonus segments not seen on YouTube, but you'll also gain access to my casual behind-the-scenes live streams, informative postings stacked with valuable information, and even just random fun pics and videos from my personal life. It's a way to support my show while getting more content. It's $5 a month for premium access and free for others. So go to my Locals page at kimiverson.locals.com.